Hey everyone, and welcome! Today we're diving into something really fascinating. It's like a medical detective story, and it all starts with a single really important clue. So, let's get right into the investigation. Okay, so picture this. Your period has been like clockwork for years, and then nothing. 1 month passes, then a second, and now you're at 90 days. It's definitely a situation that could make you worry, right? But for a doctor, this is actually the starting pistol for a really logical investigation. So where do they even begin?
Right. So there's a medical term for this, of course. It's called secondary amenorrhea. And it's super important to know that this isn't a disease in and of itself. Think of it more like a check engine light. It's a signal from your body telling you, hey, something in our really complex hormonal system is a little out of whack. Our mission today, follow those clues and find out exactly what's going on.
You know, in any good detective story, you always check for the most obvious suspect first. And when it comes to a missing period, that #1 suspect is always pregnancy. A simple test gives you that first crucial answer. If it comes back negative, well, that's when the real detective work kicks into high gear.
So where do we go from here? How do we start decoding these signals from the body? I love this analogy. Think of your whole hormonal system as a finely tuned orchestra. And the menstrual cycle, that's the music it plays. When the music suddenly stops, our job is to go check on each section of the orchestra, the key players, which are the hormones, to figure out which one is playing out of tune.
The first step is a wave of initial blood tests. We're basically checking in on 4 key messengers that run the whole show. You've got TSH, which tells us what the thyroid is up to. Then there's prolactin, which can act like a big stop signal. And finally, FSH and estradiol. These two let us listen in on that really critical conversation that's supposed to be happening between the brain and the ovaries.
Okay, so let's zoom in on one of our primary suspects right away, a hormone called prolactin. Now, its main day job, as you might guess from the name, is all about milk production after a baby is born. But here's the twist. If prolactin levels get high for other reasons, it can basically hit the brakes on the entire menstrual cycle. It's like a system-wide shutdown command.
And this is where things get really interesting because it shows how interconnected everything is. Check this out. If your thyroid is sluggish, what we call underactive, your brain goes, hey, wake up down there, and sends out a loud signal called TRH. But, and this is the key part, that TRH signal has an unintended side effect. It also pokes the pituitary gland and tells it to release more prolactin. So a problem that seems to be about your cycle could actually be starting all the way over in your thyroid. It's a classic case of a hidden culprit.
So if there's a communication breakdown, where could it be happening? Our investigation really focuses on 4 main crime scenes, if you will. We've got 2 spots up in the brain, the hypothalamus and the pituitary. Then we move down to the ovaries, and finally, the last stop is the uterus itself. The problem is hiding in one of these 4 places. All right, think of this table as our central case file, our evidence board. This is so cool. Each one of those 4 locations we just talked about leaves a unique hormonal fingerprint. For instance, if the problem is with the ovaries, the brain is basically shouting to be heard, so you'll see high levels of a hormone called FSH. But if the problem is in the brain itself, that signal never even gets sent out, so FSH levels will be low. Learning to read these different patterns is literally how we crack the case.
Okay, we have our list of suspects. Now we need to narrow it down. To do that, investigators have this really clever tool up their sleeve. It's called the progesterone challenge. And believe me, this one simple test can often blow the whole case wide open.
Remember that FSH level we talked about? Well, that first test result creates a huge fork in the road for our investigation. If FSH is high, it's like we said, the brain is shouting, but the ovaries aren't listening. That tells us exactly where to look next. But if FSH is low or normal, the plot thickens. It means the problem is somewhere else completely, either way up in the brain's command center or down at the finish line with the uterus.
So for all those cases where FSH is low or normal, we bring in the progesterone challenge test. The best way to think about it is like sending a text message to see if someone's phone is on. We're sending a little message of progesterone to the uterus just to see if it's been properly prepped by estrogen and is ready to, well, read the message and respond. And the answer we get back is super revealing. If you get a positive result, meaning bleeding happens, that's great news in a way. It tells us 2 things. The uterus is working fine and there's estrogen around. The problem is likely an ovulation issue like in PCOS. But if you get a negative result, no bleeding, well, the mystery just got deeper. That points to a bigger issue. Either there's not enough estrogen to prep the system in the first place, or there's something physically wrong with the uterus itself.
All right, that deeper investigation, that's where we're headed next. We're diving into the cases where the hormones have truly gone rogue. Let's look at some of the specific conditions that can cause these really complex imbalances.
So let's circle back to our old friend prolactin. Let's say we've checked the thyroid and it gets a clean bill of health, but prolactin levels are still high. At this point, all fingers point directly to one place, the pituitary gland. And the number one cause for this is a tiny, non-cancerous growth called a prolactinoma.
Now, these things are categorized simply by their size. You have a microadenoma, which is less than a centimeter, and a macroadenoma, which is a centimeter or bigger. And you might think, okay, what's the big deal? But as you're about to see, that size difference is everything. It's the difference between a problem that's just about hormones and one that starts causing much bigger physical problems.
And here's why that size is so critical. A macroadenoma, the bigger one, doesn't just mess with your hormones. Because of its size, it can physically start pressing on the structures around it in the brain. This is what causes what doctors call pressure symptoms. We're talking about things like headaches and even a very specific kind of vision problem that's like tunnel vision. That's a huge red flag that tells doctors something bigger is going on. Okay, let's throw another wrench in the works. What happens if all the hormone tests come back perfect? The signals are being sent, everything looks great, but there's still no period. Well, then the problem might not be with the messages, but with the receiver. We have to look at the final destination, the uterus itself. There's a rare condition called Asherman syndrome, where scar tissue inside the uterus literally acts like glue, preventing the lining from shedding, no matter how perfect the hormonal signals are. And here's another pretty dramatic cause called Sheehan syndrome. This is something that can happen after a woman experiences very severe blood loss during childbirth. That blood loss can actually starve the pituitary gland of oxygen, causing the whole thing to, well, shut down. And one of the very first clues is often the inability to breastfeed, because prolactin, the milk hormone, is one of the first to go offline. A really clear but tragic signal.
So, we've followed the clues, we've looked at the evidence, we've gone down all these different diagnostic paths, and after all that incredible detective work, we finally get to the last chapter, solving the medical mystery.
And you know what? This is the best part of the whole story. Because once you identify the true culprit, the solutions are often so targeted and so effective. If it's an underactive thyroid, you can treat it with thyroid hormone. That prolactinoma we talked about, there are amazing medications that can actually shrink it and get everything back in balance. It all comes down to getting that correct diagnosis.
This really brings us to the core idea, which is just so important to understand. Amenorrhea, the missing period, it isn't the actual disease, it's the signal. It's your body's way of telling you that its intricate, beautiful hormonal symphony is just a little out of tune and needs some help getting back on beat.
So if there's one thing to take away from all this, it's that what can feel like a really scary and random event is not random at all. It's the start of a logical, step-by-step investigation. It's a puzzle that, in most cases, can be solved, allowing doctors to find the exact source of the problem and help restore the body's natural balance. Honestly, this whole diagnostic journey is just an amazing example of how intelligently our bodies communicate with us. It really is incredible. Thanks so much for diving into this with me today. It kind of leaves you with a final thought, doesn't it? Our bodies are sending us signals all the time. The real question is, what is yours telling you?